On July 5, just like any other day, Kenneth Kenny Koontz got out of the trailer next to his family's house to visit them. But upon entering the house, he was horrified to find his entire family shot and left to bleed out on the floor. He immediately ran to the nearest phone to call the police. In the weeks that followed, investigators were unable to find the killer, leaving the community wondering who could have committed such a heinous act. After a month-long hearing in October 1989, Jacobs was found not guilty of killing the 55-year-old Koontz. Hi, and welcome back to Mysterious Cases 007. If you are new here, please consider subscribing, as it helps us motivate to create more intriguing content for you. Let's have a look at the case with the most insane twists you have ever heard. Bern, Wisconsin, is in the middle of the state and is part of the Wausau urban area. Only 562 people lived in Bern in the year 2000. The number of people living in the town is 16.5 per square mile. In Bern, many families have the benefit of living on properties with more than an acre. Bern is a quiet town with a lot of parks, golf fields, and national parks. This makes it a great place to raise a family. At least, that's what the Koontz family thought when they lived here. The Koontz family included 70-year-old Helen Koontz, her son Kenneth, who was 55, Randy Koontz, who was 30 at the time, Helen's brothers Clarence Koontz, 78, Irene Koontz, 81, and Mary Koontz, 72. People in the neighborhood knew that the family was very close-knit. Some people thought they were too close. The family lived in a gray house that was falling apart on 108 acres of land 6 miles from Byron Town Center. People who had been to the family home and farm said that it was crowded and full of things. The house didn't have indoor plumbing, so the family cooked and stayed warm with a wood-burning fire. Kenneth was the only Koontz who didn't live in the crowded house. Kenneth decided to live in a caravan next to the house so he could have some privacy. Even though the Koontz house looked old and worn, they were not poor. They had been able to hide more than $20,000 in cash around the house between them. People thought the Koontz were a little strange. They always paid their bills in cash and didn't like talking to other people. The family wore mostly clothes that had been passed down from one person to another. They seemed to be very close. Kenneth and Randy would often drive their mom, Helen, into town so she could buy food and pay the rent. The Koontz were treated like strangers in their own town, according to a story in the Post-Crescent. Some people in the town were nicer to the Koontz, but most people thought they were strange and weird. If it hadn't been for a windy July 4 at the evening, the Koontz would have been forgotten. Kenneth woke up in his caravan on July 5, 1987, and grabbed his head. Before going out for drinks with his friends, he spent the night at the cheese plant where he used to work. After taking care of his business and getting ready for the day, Kenneth walked carefully out of his caravan and towards the main house. He thought his mother, uncle, and aunts would be there to meet him. Instead, he saw something that would haunt him forever. Kenneth called out to his mother as the front door spring squeaked, but she didn't answer. He shut the door behind him and kept calling her name. When he took a few more steps down the hall, he stopped in shock. His Aunt Marie was shot in the head with a .22 caliber gun and was lying still on the floor in a pool of blood. Kenneth walked around his house in a daze, hoping this was just a bad dream he would soon wake up from. Randy had been shot and left to die in a pool of blood when he got to the kitchen. Kenneth ran over and tried to bring him back to life, but it was too late. Kenneth knew he had to find the rest of his family, so he started moving carefully from room to room. At this point, Kenneth didn't know if the bad guy was still in the house, and he was afraid that the same thing might happen to him. When he got to Clarence and Irene's rooms, he found both of their dead bodies. .22 caliber gun had also been used to shoot them. Irene was found slumped in a chair while Clarence was in his room. Kenneth knew that his family had not had time to respond or run away because the attack had come as a surprise. Kenneth felt sick to his stomach as he ran down the stairs and out the door. He ran to the house of his closest neighbor and banged on the door. When someone finally opened the door, Kenneth asked to use their phone in a bunch of different ways. Kenneth's body was taken over by panic and fear, and the adrenaline was pumping through his veins. Finally, he was able to talk to his friend, and the neighbor called 911. Within minutes, dozens of police cars with flashing lights and blaring horns surrounded the 108-acre Humble Koontz farm. Investigators learned about what was going on, and then the investigation was officially launched. The first person the Marathon County Sheriff's Office tried to talk to was Kenneth. After all, he was the one who found his family's bodies, and he was the only one who wasn't hurt. During the first conversation, Kenneth said that his mother, Helen Koontz, couldn't be found anywhere in the house. Even though Kenneth was worried about his mother, detectives couldn't help but think she was up to something. In the early stages of the investigation, a reason for the crime hadn't been found yet, so detectives were open to all possibilities. The Koontz home was carefully searched by people who work at crime scenes. In their reports, they said that the house was full of trash and didn't have any modern features like electricity or a kitchen. The family lived in filth because they never got rid of anything and let dirt build up around the house. This seemed odd to the people who looked into it. The family had a farm that brought in a steady income, and there was also more than $20,000 in cash hidden around the house. Investigators were sure that whoever killed the Koontz didn't know that there was a lot of cash lying around. With inflation taken into account, $20,000 would be worth more than $52,000 today. Even though the family was poor and lived in bad conditions, they had a TV and a video player. A rumor spread like a wildfire through the town, which made the family stand out even more. Gail Wheeler, the owner of a local hardware store, told the Marathon County Police that Helen had bought some .22 caliber bullets from his store in the weeks before the killing. Helen said that her sons Randy and Keith used the ammunition to shoot birds on the large family farm. But that wasn't the most interesting piece of information she gave. Gail told the police that Helen had reported that her family watched dirty movies on the VCR. This was supported by the fact that a library of sexy books was found in the Koontz family home. Worryingly, this wasn't the first time that rumors of weird sexual behavior and incest had been going around the family. Investigators in Marathon County found a case file, 1930. In it, a 40-year-old neighbor was accused of beating and getting 15-year-old Helen pregnant. The court found the neighbor guilty. Not only that, but Kenneth also thought that Clarence Koontz, Helen's brother, was his real father. It's not clear how true these claims are, but Helen's family, especially her mother, has always said they're not true. As the rumor mill turned, more and more rumors came to light over time. People in Bern thought that Helen and her son Randy shared a bed at night, which added to the rumors that they were in love. It was also said that brothers Clarence, Marie, and Irene slept in the living room together. People in the town had heard about incest for a long time, and now they were wondering if those relationships had come to a head. People kept making guesses. Helen, on the other hand, was still nowhere to be found. Even if they were a little ways away, the people of Bern stood behind Kenneth Koontz. Kenneth was at work and then at the bar, so he didn't know anything about where his mother went. As summer turned into fall, people started to talk about whether a 70-year-old woman who was 5 feet, 3 inches tall could kill her whole family. People stopped thinking about the Koontz family, and life went back to normal in the town of Bern. While that was going on, detectives kept looking for Helen and the person who killed almost all of her family. But as the story got more complicated, the police found a strange twist. Helen's body was found in a marsh in Taylor County, Wisconsin, in April 1988. 9 months after the killing. She had been shot in the head with a .22 caliber bullet, just like the rest of her family. After Helen's body was found, an autopsy was done, but any new information that was found has never been made public. But for a short time, the investigation went nowhere because Helen, who was thought to be the killer, ended up dying the same way the rest of her family did. Surprisingly, the killing in 1987 wasn't the first tragedy of this kind that the Koontz family had been through. Mary Koontz, Helen's grandma, was found dead in her home in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, in December 1905. Even though the study was short, it led to a shocking result. Wenzel Koontz, Mary's son, was accused of killing her. Wenzel killed his mother with a club while she was in bed. The rest of the family found her body. Wenzel was found to be crazy during his hearing, so he was sent to a mental hospital. His brother was also a patient at the same place by chance. By 1906, the Koontz family had lost a lot of members, and the ones who stayed moved to Marathon County in 1914 to start a new life on a farm that was meant to be full of food. When they got there, though, they found out that they had been lied to. They had been promised fields, but all they found was a wasteland full of tree stumps and old food. The Koontz finally became well known in Bern and Marathon County, but it was hard for investigators to figure out why they did what they did. Since more than $20,000 was found in the family home, stealing couldn't have been the reason. Then, in 1988, this already strange case got even stranger. Investigators found new clues that helped them figure out who the suspect was. Christopher Jacobs, 3, who lived in Athens, Wisconsin, not far from Bern, was the man. Investigators found out that Christopher, who was 22 years old, had bought a car from the Koontz just before they were killed. He was one of only a small number of people who had met the Koontz. People stayed away from them because they thought they were strange or because they had heard the rumors. Others never met them because they lived in seclusion. Investigators thought it was odd that Christopher knew this strange family, so they began to look into it. Investigators searched his Medford property and found a car, 2 .22 caliber rifles, .22 caliber ammunition, spent shell casings, and newspaper articles about the killings of the Koontz family. After a forensic study of the car found on Christopher's property, it was thought that the tire tracks found at the Koontz crime scene were made by that car. A motion sent to the Wisconsin Court of Appeals said that police had made plaster casts of tire tracks and footprints in the area around the Koontz home and in their yard, which is about a quarter of a mile away. In January 1988, detectives looked for Christopher Jacobs' car to see if the tracks found in the Koontz yard could have been made by its tires. Christopher was caught in 1988, but a few days later, he was let go with no charges. Even worse, investigators had a hard time getting proof that he was roaming free without a care in the world for months after he was set free. The Marathon County Sheriff's Office didn't come to Christopher's door again until August 1988. He was caught again and charged with the same crime. He was also told that the case would go to trial. Then, in August 1988, Jacobs was accused of being a part of 5 murders. His arrest led to one of the longest investigations in Marathon County. Christopher Jacobs, 3, who was 22 years old, woke up in a jail cell on a hot August morning. It took him a while to get used to being told when and where to eat, sleep, and go. Christopher kept saying he was innocent and hired a lawyer throughout the process. Christopher's lawyers knew that the proof against him was mostly based on inferences. The murder weapon has never been found, and the tire tracks in his own .22 caliber gun were, at best, a hint. Christopher's lawyers worked on their defense for months. The trial began in October 1989. Crocker Stevenson, a reporter for the Milwaukee Journal, had been watching the case closely, and when the court dates were made public, he made sure to get a seat in the front row. Christopher Jacobs, 3, was facing a long term for killing almost an entire family, but in a shocking turn of events, the jury found him not guilty on all charges after only 10 hours of deliberation. Right away, there were cries and shouts in the hall.
As to count number 5, not guilty of murder in the first degree of felony.
Christopher gave a gasp. He was free at last. Christopher was freed from jail after the decision on October 28, 1989. But he wouldn't stay that way for long. In 1993, Christopher's ex-girlfriend, Stacy Weiss, stirred up this strange and weird case again. She went to the Marathon County Sheriff's Office and asked to speak to Lieutenant Randall Onish in particular. Lieutenant Onish pushed the play button on the tape player and looked at Stacy in shock as she spoke. Stacy told Lieutenant Onish that she and Christopher went out on a date in 1991, and that Christopher admitted to killing the Koontz family. Christopher said that he did it to show himself that he was a man. Stacy said that Christopher went to the Koontz house on the evening of July 4, 1987, where Randy Koontz met him after Christopher bought a car from Randy. They got along well, and Randy was happy to have Christopher move in with him. Stacy says that the two got into a fight quickly, and that Christopher then pulled out a .22 caliber gun and shot Randy. Christopher then went around the house in a planned way and shot the rest of the family in the head from point-blank range. Christopher tied Helen up and took her to the swamp, where he shot her and left her body. No one knows why he did this. Christopher was scared when his ex-girlfriend admitted that she was just a jealous lover out for payback. Christopher was caught again because the Marathon County Sheriff's Office believed what Stacy said. This time, Christopher was charged with kidnapping and killing Helen Koontz. Christopher Jacobs III wouldn't go to court for 5 years, so agents were glad they'd moved quickly. Reports say that the time limit was about to run out just a few hours before Christopher was caught for the second time. Christopher Jacobs III went to court again on June 8, 1998, to find out what would happen to him for the second time. Christopher's luck ran out, and after only 4 hours of debate, he was found guilty of kidnapping Helen Koontz and keeping her in a false prison. Christopher Jacobs III was given a sentence of 31 years in jail, and he won't be able to get out until February 2020. Christopher Jacobs III, who was 53 years old at the time, was given freedom and let out of the Columbia Correction Institution on February 4, 2020. In a strange turn of events, Christopher was taken back into prison at the Marathon County Jail on February 5, 2020. Strangely, he had put himself back in jail by telling officers that he didn't want parole and would rather finish his term at the Columbia Correction Institution. But he still told the media that he was innocent and that the cops had forced his ex-girlfriend Stacy to lie about his supposed confession. According to the Wausau Daily Herald, Christopher Jacobs claimed that Marathon County might be attempting to frame him with false charges in order to hide the fact that he was wrongly imprisoned. He further stated that he had been advised to leave Wisconsin after being acquitted of all charges in 1989 because the police were planning to seek revenge against him. Christopher Jacobs III went back to jail in June 2020. He chose to spend the last 14 months of his term there. There are a lot of people in Bern who don't think Christopher killed the Koontz family. The most likely explanation is that someone in the family did it, but since all of them except one have died, it's unlikely that we'll ever find out the truth. What do you think about this situation? Do you think Christopher Jacobs III did it, or do you think the real killer is hiding somewhere else? Use the comments to tell us what you think. Like, share, and subscribe to our station so you can see more interesting videos.